Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of MCS Science for Living Environment. Today, we're going to be talking about the endocrine system, a very important system in your body. So, some of the key vocabulary for this particular unit is that the system itself is a network of glands, and if you look at the image here on the right, over here you can see various different glands that are highlighted. Now, this isn't every single gland. It is the major glands that are present in our bodies that are there to produce and release hormones into the bloodstream to help us do things like regulate growth, our metabolism, the uptake of calcium, and very important vital features, functions such as reproduction. A hormone itself, it's a chemical, typically either a steroidal or non-steroidal chemical that's produced within the gland and released into the bloodstream. Glands themselves are just systems of ducts inside the body that produce and release these hormones into the bloodstream. Endocrine means they're releasing it internally. That's the endo part of this. Negative feedback loops are very important. We've discussed them previously this year when we were talking about homeostasis. As long as the system is within the set range, then the system is off. And that's what a negative feedback loop does. When the level in the blood of a particular chemical goes above or below the set range, then homeostasis is disturbed. And then the negative feedback loop kicks in, turns on the glands or whatever response is necessary to get it back within the range that it's supposed to be. Homeostasis, as we've discussed earlier, it's the process of maintaining a steady, stable internal environment. Now, that doesn't mean that your body temperature is 37 Celsius at all times. It's not. We fluctuate up and down, but we have a set range that we need to stay within. Metabolism itself, it's all your chemical reactions in your whole entire body that are being used to make sure that you can survive. They're your life processes. Every hormone has a target cell, and that cell is where the hormone is targeted to by the receptor molecules that are on the outside of the cell. They match up to a part of the hormone, part of the physical structure of the hormone, and they work sort of like a lock and key. The hormone can only affect the receptors of the cells that have them, which makes sense if you think about it. Every target cell for, say, insulin has insulin receptors on its surface, and they will fit together like a lock and key, and that will allow the hormone to have an effect on that cell. There are different ways that hormones affect cells. We'll get into that later. The hormone model, I got to move this picture. It's kind of in the way. Put it back up here. When hormones are produced, the gland can store a small amount of them, depending on the gland. They're stored until they're needed, and then the hormone is released into the bloodstream, where it will travel quickly because our blood is moving at a high rate of speed throughout our body to find the matching receptors on the target cell. It will bind to that receptor and then create a cascade of responses by the target cell. There's a lot of complicated biochemistry to this. We won't get into that with this video. This is just a basic overview. There are two different kinds of hormones. Typically, we talk about the steroidal and the non-steroidal. Steroidal hormones, because of their nature, they are lipid soluble. So they can actually pass right through the cell membrane and get inside the cell and cause a more direct response inside the cell by the receptor complex inside the cell that then can cause DNA to be expressed and genes to be transcribed and produce proteins that are needed for the response by those steroidal hormones. The non-steroidal hormones need to bond to a receptor on the surface of the cell membrane because they're not lipid soluble. They can't get through the membrane very easily. So what happens is they're going to bind to a receptor on the surface of the cell. Then a chemical message is going to be proliferated inside the cell, which causes a whole series of cascading pathways inside the cell to be activated. And then a secondary messenger eventually activates something in the cell or deactivates something in the cell or creates, a pathway that enters into the nucleus and gets a protein produced. So non-steroidal ones are not as fast as steroidal ones typically because they have to go through the whole cycle to get their message produced. This is an example of a steroidal hormone entering into the cell. So here it is over here. It passes directly through and then it bonds with a receptor complex. I'm going to move my picture again. These are called molecular chaperones, and they're basically just there to help the bonding of the receptor to the steroid inside the cell. Then once all that is produced, this receptor hormone complex goes into the nucleus, bonds to receptors, and causes production of the protein through transcription and translation. This is an example of what non-steroidal hormone pathway looks like. And you can see it's a whole lot of complicated path here. You have these receptors on the cell membrane. Here's the hormone, this little pie piece. When the hormone fits into the receptor, it causes this inactive G protein to activate, which goes through a whole cascade. Now you have G proteins down through the pathway. ATP is used to produce what's called cyclic AMP or CAMP, and that causes activation of protein kinases. And so you can see it gets pretty crazy inside the cell here. Now, as a living environment student, you are not really required to remember this. This is a little bit beyond the scope, but I thought it would be informative for you to see it, because if you do take college bio down the road, this is something you're going to study. So we'll start right off with the glands themselves. I'm going to move my picture again. The adrenal glands, they're pretty important. They sit on top of our kidneys. They're really small, and obviously there are two because we have two kidneys. They produce epinephrine, which is adrenaline, and norepinephrine. And these two hormones regulate our stress response. So it's fight or flight. Then we also have another one there called aldosterone, which can help to upregulate absorption of nutrients from the kidneys. Also, we have cortisol, which tends to be it helps to control our metabolism of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. Cortisol is considered a stress hormone. If you're under a lot of stress, then cortisol will be released and your body will start to retain things like fats. I gotta move my picture again. Put it down here for this one. The pancreas sits just behind the right side of the stomach, kind of down and below. The pancreas's job is to help us regulate blood sugar, and it is very much involved in a negative feedback loop with the rest of the body. You can see the loop over here on the right-hand side. We'll start right here. After eating, your blood glucose level goes up. Your brainstem, hypothalamus, detects this. A message is sent to your pancreas, which produces insulin. That insulin causes the liver, to take up glucose and store it in the form of glycogen, but it also causes our body cells to suck in more glucose. That then lowers our blood sugar back down to our standard set range, and the pancreas is shut off. If the blood glucose level goes below the set point because you haven't had enough sugar and you need sugar, your pancreas can get a different message, which is to release another hormone called glucagon. Glucagon then causes the release of that stored up glycogen and conversion into glucose, which is released into the bloodstream, and then our blood sugar goes back to normal. So there are actually two overlapping feedback loops here. There's one for high blood sugar and there's one for low blood sugar, and they work together to regulate our blood sugar to keep it within the set range. Obviously, people with diabetes have some sort of issue with one or the other of these two pathways. So both of these things are critical for life as humans, obviously, because if you don't have a functional pancreas, or if your insulin is malformed or something along those lines, you've got diabetes, which is a life-altering disease. Got to move the picture again. So I'll go down here. The thyroid gland, it's down at the base of your neck, wrapping around the trachea. It's pretty important. It produces a hormone called thyroxine, which regulates our metabolic rates in our cells. It can upregulate cell respiration in our cells to do things like produce more energy, or to if for whatever reason we need more heat, we need thyroxine to upregulate cell respiration to help us generate more heat. um, Thyroid gland is well known for needing iodine. So if you go to the store and you buy a thing of salt, you'll see that most salt is iodized, which means it's got iodine in it. Without enough iodine in there, you can't create thyroxine, which can cause a lot of problems in terms of regulating your metabolism. It's not a good thing. The parathyroid, these are four tiny little glands that are part of the thyroid gland. And their job is to regulate the amount of calcium in the blood and absorption by bones. And obviously, that's important because if you don't have enough calcium in your blood, your bones are brittle. You have a problem with, easy breakage of your bones. So obviously, we want to keep the parathyroid in good condition as well. The thymus gland, move my picture again. Thymus gland is located basically on top of your heart. If you were to look at where it sits, it's in between the right and left lungs, up above your heart. It creates thymosin, which is a hormone that stimulates T cell production, which is a type of white blood cell production in young children. Over time, as we get older, this particular gland is shrinking in size because we're not needing it anymore because we're starting to build up antibodies as we're exposed to more and more things in our lives. Ovaries, these are a female reproductive gland. They are these two little they look like beans if you were to look at them in real life. They're very small. They are there to help regulate the female menstrual cycle and to produce fertilized eggs that can then be released into the fallopian tubes and then, help to produce new offspring of our species. Excuse me. The major hormones of the ovaries are estrogen and progesterone. They help to regulate the menstrual cycle. We'll get into that when we do the female reproductive system later on. But they do have major impacts on the female menstrual cycle, and they're really important. And then if you look also, there is the endometrium inside the uterus itself. It's the kind of the inner layer of the uterus. It secretes a hormone that helps to bind an egg to the uterine lining and stop the menstrual cycle from progressing. Because if an egg is implanted in the endometrium and you don't want it to be shed, because if it's shed, the egg goes with it. Testes, these are the male organs. They produce steroidal hormones such as testosterone. Testosterone is important for a lot of the characteristics that we think of as male characteristics, things like facial hair, deeper voice, chest hair, armpit hair, that kind of thing. But they're also here to help regulate the production of sperm, which obviously is necessary for the reproduction of our species. The pineal gland, or pineal gland, depending on who you're talking to, is located in the brain, and it's very small. It's right here, this tiny little guy. It is responsible for regulating our internal rhythms. So by secreting melatonin, it helps us to regulate things like our wake and sleep cycles. And because of that, it's a pretty important little gland. Without it, you'd have a little trouble sleeping at night, and that can be significantly impacting your daily life, your health, things like that. The hypothalamus, it's attached to the posterior pituitary gland, so it's the back pituitary gland. The hypothalamus helps to kind of gather the information from the brain and helps to control the secretions of hormones by the pituitary gland, so that in a way, this is kind of the major pass-through where it collects all the information from the body, detecting all the different hormones that are being released, plus integrating the nerve signals from the brain, sending that information through to the pituitary and allowing the pituitary to release the proper hormones to regulate the body. So this is a big one. The anterior pituitary is considered the master gland, Although I would argue that the hypothalamus might actually be the master gland because it is controlled by the hypothalamus. But you can see all the different hormones that this particular gland secretes. Follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, they're there to help regulate the production of the hormones by the ovaries. Thyroid stimulating hormone stimulates the thyroxine release from the thyroid gland. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, that's a fun one to say, stimulates chemicals from the adrenal cortex, so the production of adrenaline. Growth hormone stimulates growth of our cells. And then you have melanocyte stimulating hormone, which helps us to pigment our skin in response to sunlight. And then prolactin is a hormone that is critical for production of milk in the mammary glands of nursing mothers. The posterior pituitary, this is the back one. Anterior is front, posterior is rear. Oxytocin, this is a major hormone of childbirth. It stimulates contractions, which allows the baby to be born. It also allows milk to be released from the breast tissue initially. This is really important because that first little bit of milk that comes from mother, the colostrum, contains lots of antibodies and can help the baby for the first 6 weeks of their lives until they have built up their own immune system. And then also antidiuretic hormone. This regulates our kidneys. It helps our kidneys to absorb more water from our urine stream, basically from our waste stream, to keep the water level, our hydration level in the blood high. And that's an important thing. I'm not going to obviously assign lots of homework, but you guys already have these things posted on Classroom for you. So, the due dates are all listed there. Go ahead. You can work on them at your own pace. Feel free to use the notes or any other resource that you need. And that's all we have for today. Thanks for watching.